Hi there, welcome to this Cloud Native Skunkworks deep dive on Datree. Datree is an automated policy pipeline for Kubernetes, effectively honing in on manifests and their misconfigurations. And this is really important right now, especially when we think about supply chain security, this shift left towards trying to pick up things early on, and the plethora of new personas that we now see working within our clusters, right? DevOps engineers, SREs, product engineers, and the degree of experience they might have with operating and producing manifests configurations is varied, right? So I think that now more than ever we're seeing this real surge towards trying to solve the problem before it becomes a problem, integrating it into the Git webhook when you push into a merge request, being able to take it right to the beginning of your CI/CD pipeline. I think about tooling such as Terraform, which now has things like TF-lint and other companion projects who have solved that in the infrastructure configuration space. But looking at it at this application tier, slightly higher up, is really fascinating to me. And so when I saw Datree, I was really interested to see that as a project and as a company, the aspirations here are really for helping engineers, DevSecOps engineers, Kubernetes administrators, and product engineers. And what it does in a nutshell is effectively it offers you two things. There is a CLI and there is a SaaS companion product that is hosted by Datree, so you can access it anywhere. And what's cool is that for individual users like myself, just to check it out, it's absolutely free. And I love this because free things are great, and I can just go off and put them in my GitHub Actions, and I can just play around with them. So effectively, this gives you the ability to look at YAML files, and it comes back with, hey, there's something wrong with this file. I think there might be potentially a fix for this vulnerability, or this is not how you should be doing X, Y, Z. What's really interesting as well about this is that the experience starts from the open source arena. And what I mean by that is that the Datree CLI offers you the same kind of functionality as the SaaS hosted product. And what's really interesting about that is that it's got a pretty wide sort of 35 contributor community here, with many more on Slack who are actively building features and rules. There are a bunch of open events that are encouraging people to also build rules for Datree, and those rules could be anything from naming conventions to looking at root access on a pod to even looking at whether you're hosting a secret as an environmental variable. And all these things are useful in their own way. So how does the platform actually work? Well, let's have a quick look through my journey so far. I effectively downloaded the CLI. I ran the CLI against a bunch of templates. So these template files might be in a repository with a chart in it, and that chart might have templates. And you've got a couple ways of doing this. You can either run the Datree Helm command. So it's a plugin for Helm. So you go like Helm, Datree, or you can just run Helm template dot and then pipe into Datree test, which is the original command through the CLI and just templating the files out. So you've got two ways of doing it. And then what it does is it comes back, or rather before it comes back, it goes off and does some computation against your hosted app.datree account. And then it comes back and gives you some results. Now that hosted component, the SaaS component, we'll talk a little bit more about later on, but that's where you can mix and match different types of components and different types of rule sets. So if we look here, you see Datree, you've got this ability to test, but inside of testing here, you can change the policy to run against. And policies are an important way of grouping rules because they help us to illustrate and express what it is we care about in the moment, right? And so I might care about all the networking stuff, right? I might be a network admin and I don't know anything really about these manifests, but I need to know that they aren't trying to use something like host network. And so this will go off and check and validate against those policies. And if the manifest infringes on that, we can exit out with a 1, and we can then fail this if it's in a CI/CD. So mentioning CI/CD, how do you integrate Datree into your workflow? Well, so we mentioned this idea of like saying Helm template dot Datree test. I think there was also another annotation I need because I have an old ingress, so ignore missing schemas. And let's have a look what we're going to do here. So if I go Helm template again, yep, that looks good. Datree test. Oh, I know what I did wrong. I think I put a dot, not a dash. Okay, so now it's loading in those Helm files, and you can see that I've got a whole bunch of misconfigurations that it's found. What's interesting here is it looks like it globs the files together into a single file. And this actually reminds me of running Unreal Engine. It had this, back in the day, it had this fascinating system called a Unity build, where all the C++ files get globbed into a single file, which makes the linking process much quicker. Anyway, so let's have a look down here. So we've got policy checks. A whole bunch of policies have been failed, but what's nice is that it gives me a couple of ideas of where this has gone wrong. So I can see inside the deployment, the release name it's arguing with because I've not set that in Helm. We could do that. I think it's, generate name? And I should get a slightly different error this time. I can't imagine the generated name is going to be any better as well. So we've also got things like readiness probes should be enabled. We've got more than one replica should be enabled. That's kind of useful as well. And then here you can see this interesting component down here. Okay, so automatically we're getting this login URL. So the only experience that I had so far was this idea that when I run the CLI, it asks me to log in. And when I logged in, all I had to do was grab my Datree token, and that Datree token I've got stored locally. So what it's using is that token, and everything else is going up to the SaaS product. So that's really cool. So I'm going to click through this, and what we should see happen, if I bring this onto my screen here, is that my policies are displayed. Policies being effectively the buckets, the containers for our rule set. So if we think about a policy, well, that policy, as I mentioned earlier, could be networking. That policy is going to contain a bunch of rules. So if we start with first principles, rule 1 might be no host networks. And what will happen is that networking policy goes and gets run. For example, if I go to here, and I think we had a P flag, let's have a look and see what policy we can do. So let's put networking. I think that's what I called my example here. So I've got one called networking. And you can see what's happened now is it's gone off and it's run just the rules within my networking policy. So two rules out of 30. And the potential here is fascinating to me, especially when we start thinking about these large-scale organizations who may well have, say, 700 or 800 different rules. We can use policies to start carving out small domains of the things we care about. And equally, that example of, let's say we're at a startup and we want to move all the way to an enterprise business, we don't care about the same things necessarily, but we do want to make sure that we can just as quickly run selective, very surgical rule sets to ensure the quality of our manifest scales with our business. So that's a really nice feature. And what I also like is that the CLI and the UX are comparable, right? In the sense that you can fairly well work purely within the CLI, but the UX takes it to a heightened experience. And that's a really important point to think about, especially when we have to understand that in larger businesses, it's not necessarily DevOps engineers or SREs who are just working in the terminal. You'll have a bunch of folks who are analysts. You'll have folks who are working in compliance departments, making sure that these things are actually being checked and these are actually running. Now, one of the things that I think would be interesting to talk about is what are the actual rules that we're looking at, and how do these get stored within Datree? And what is really cool is that if you go straight to the docs, you will see that Datree was built in mind with this ID to have effectively the rules baked in as YAML files. So you can upload your rules, you can download your rules to Datree. So this is called policy as code. And what I find really awesome about this is that in a disaster situation, or if we create a new team account, I can ship all my policies, right? In my Bitbucket or in my GitHub, my GitLab, I can have secure, SecOps policies or something like that for Datree, and I can then just quickly publish those policies out and upload them back to the platform. Equally, you can see that if you've used custom resources within Kubernetes, this all looks, very, very familiar. You've got the idea of the API version, and then you'll see that you have a policies list or array where you can have your rules inside of that data construct. And so this again doubles down on this idea that Datree are trying to build this really for engineers who want to get this inside of a more of a global life cycle, not this sort of like one shot fire and forget. This thing is going to be part of your workflow. It's going to be tunable through immutable configuration. For example, if you change Datree itself, you could do that in a merge request and then publish changes. And so you have multiple ways you can start to think about working with this, right? So I would even think that, as to my earlier example, if I have a repository of rules, I could publish that in my own workflow. And so this now invites a completely different set of users to start working with Datree as a platform, and we can ensure that our business continuity and security is always being kept up to date. So let's just identify that as, let's say, this could be our compliance auditing team, and this could be our product engineering team. Therefore, they're both able to operate through this shared platform and see value from both sides. So I mentioned this idea of this centralized policy, this ability to publish policy as code, but let's talk about sort of what are the rules that you get out of the box. And if you saw a moment ago, I've actually highlighted a few of these within policies. You've got your default policy, but for example, with security, I've turned a few on just as exemplars of what I think are good security policies and rules to have. So going back to this, let's look at networking again, as per my first example. Prevent an ingress from forwarding all traffic to a single container. Prevent a service from exposing a node port. This is a particularly poignant example. In large enterprises, you often will have a cloud controller manager that's been custom designed for that internal infrastructure, especially if you're on-prem hosted. And they might not want you to start spinning up load balancers, right? That might consume IP addresses. They might not have properly configured VXLANs. There might be other issues. And so being able to monitor the type that's being desired in a service spec is super useful. And it's kind of cool here, actually. When you look at these pages, it's really beautifully laid out. Like, it's just like markdown dream. I wish I could be as good with my own documentation, but it's beautifully done, and it's very easy to understand what's going on. So this is enabled by default. This comes in the default policy, is what that means. And the relationship to the rules of these policies is that you get a default, and that's it. Everything's turned on, all rules, and then you can start to siphon them out, and you can even then create your own rule sets. And so for the sake of this example, I've got these demonstrations of how I would probably create different policies and how I would slice and dice them. So at this point, it's pretty worth thinking a bit more about that who's it for kind of approach. Who's it for? Well, I would say that it's for everyone, right? In the sense of, I care as an individual about a few things. I want to have a list of fairly easy to use security rules, quick and accurate networking rules for my provider. And that's a big thing for me, right? So if I'm working on a hyperscaler, I need to make sure that, let's say, the ingress is matching the right type, or it's got the right annotations on that ingress. We've all been there where we've had to import an old project into something like AWS, and the ingress doesn't work because we don't support the right annotations for SSL using ALB. And equally, we might be wanting to use a different storage class that's not available, right? And so therefore, we could have general rules for mapping a configuration to a cloud provider. And again, with this idea of custom rules, I can do all this. However, I might not want to do all this all the time. So then the most, I think, important part of the three rules, these 3 points here, is to have selection, filtering, sharing, editing, and customization of my rules and policies. One of the things that I really like, and the reason I mentioned customization, is because if you go back to this first area here in Datree, this is the history pane, and this shows you what's happened within your runs that you've had through your account token. And so you can see, for me, I've been running a bunch of stuff. I've been playing around with it. I've been testing my various my various YAML files, and if this was in a CI/CD, this would be failing out because I've not configured the manifests against the rules and the default policy in such a way that it will pass. What I also like is that you can go into these and edit the actual message that comes out of these rules. And so this one here, so accessing host files by using high UIDs. I can also then say something along the lines of, please see, sorry about that, please see SecOps team, right? And this idea of customization is incredibly useful because then we can start to create a centralized repository of knowledge and of policy knowledge, and that is a goldmine for not only compliance and auditing, but also for general hygiene of how we deal with configuration management. Because if there is a precedent among the team for doing things a certain way, rather than approaching an individual and saying, hey, you know what? You should be the one that changes the way you write this stuff. You do it in code. You can do it through policy. You can express, we're moving towards this policy approach. Please check out this documentation as for why, and let users arrive at that journey on their own, rather than mandating it or having this sort of conflict of pushing people into a certain shape. So using Datree for this is probably an unintended outcome or side effect, but I think it's something that we'll start to see used more and more. One little addendum I want to make here is that customization doesn't stop with rules on the dashboard. You also can codify those rules using YAML and JSON templates that Datree provides you. As you can see in the documentation, it's really easy to make an edit to specifically suit my use case or tailor it to my particular scenario. This is really exciting because it gives that extra level of future-proofing and customization. So it's definitely for businesses who want to scale the amount of policies they have as they grow. It's definitely for the individual. Now, I would think the journey would be a bit like this. You have a person, and then at the other end, you have enterprise, right? Everything in between is kind of this murky journey of growth of how do you get there. But really on that journey, there are going to be a few types of rules that you'll keep around with you, right? And this is where I see it as this really interesting path of being able to take or create a policy, to carry that policy all the way with you, and to create new policies as you need them, right? So I might say that to begin with, I only need a set of 5 rules. And then I might want to say that, well, actually I need 10, 15 rules, but they're slightly different rules. But the cool thing is that these policies are effectively just aggregators of the rules that get built into Datree. So you can aggregate and create a bucket of all the rules you care about. And as a user, it's super straightforward and super interesting. So with that said, what do I think the next kind of steps for this are? Well, I really like this idea of collaboration and the platform as collaboration. I would love to see the ability to control the policies through the CLI as well more. But I do see that there's already a really strong onus towards the UX being more of a hub for teams as well. In the settings page, which I really like, is, as we said, there's already this ability to download policy YAMLs. And you have a level of, I guess you call it auditing, or at least you could say it was, kind of rate limiting / metrics and information around your usage. That would be fantastic to see expanded. As we start to see teams adopt the platform, I want to know how often we're running policy checks. We could even mandate that we have to be running a certain level of checks through our CI/CD pipelines. For example, there should be no pipelines that are run in a company that do not have CI/CD integration. Datree have fantastic documentation. If you go to the hub here around the integrations that I actually have available, and for this video, I was really looking into things like the Helm plugin. I was looking at the GitHub Actions for Datree, and one of the things that I wanted to do, and I've actually managed to accomplish, was to write a Helm Datree GitHub Action. So now you have the ability to use the Helm Datree plugin, so you don't have to pass the templates in manually like you do here, and in fact it will just scan your entire chart directory. And that was so easy because of the way the CLI has been built. And this plug and play kind of ecosystem, I think, is going to be extremely exciting in the future. So with all that said, Datree misconfigurations within Kubernetes, it's an extremely hot area. I love what they've done in terms of they keep it simple, right? It's not overinflated. There are a very strong set of core functionality and features that it does well. The idea of rules, the idea of policies, the idea that you have a CLI, a SaaS offering, both these two things are complementary. The idea is that the SaaS offering is where more of the metadata can live and the persistent data, and the CLI is for just quick checks. I'm excited to see what happens next in the future because I feel like there is going to be an extremely voracious market for this kind of CLI tooling, especially one that doesn't try and trap you inside of lots of different plans and lots of different feature gates. It's really, really strong in what it does. And in fact, the way that it's been documented and the ability to extend that documentation makes it so easy. Again, I want to go back and see, hey, what does this particular alert mean? I can go in and see this really, really beautiful page of, okay, well, look, this is the kind of error you get. This is how you solve it. In this case, it's a resource memory limit. This is how you fix it. I think that this has been really a kind of a lightning rod to making people feel like there is an opinionated way of doing things, and that's a good thing to have, because when you're opinionated as a platform, it means that you have something you care about, and you want to make sure that you're helping to have other folks who can go along that journey and improve the qualitative value of their configuration over time. So I hope you've enjoyed this video. Datree, go check it out. It is free to use. It is on GitHub. It's also a SaaS hosted offering. You can try both of them under no plan whatsoever. You can see that you can get a lot of value out of it straight away. I'm still fixing things from one of my demo example repositories, but they're valuable changes that I need to make, and overall it will improve the hygiene, the health, and the ability to lower my risk profile for my deployments that go into my Kubernetes cluster. Thanks again. If you like this video, please do like and subscribe, and I will be happy to address any comments. All of the code that I produced today, everything you see here is free and on the Cloud Native Skunkworks hosted site. Thank you so much. Goodbye.